today for this final video in a 3-part series where I'm discussing the items that I felt were necessary to bring with me when I recently moved to a remote property in Alaska. Now, whether you're planning a move to Alaska yourself or regardless of where you live in the world, the items that I'm discussing today are things that are recommended for everybody to have at their disposal in the event of an emergency. Now, I want to put out a disclaimer that in the event of a real emergency, that you contact 911 or whatever emergency services are available to you in your area. Should I have a real emergency here on the property, I would need to call in an air ambulance service because of my location and because of the fact that you cannot get to my front door by way of road during these winter months. There are 2 other channels that I watch here in Alaska that are even more remote and isolated, cut off from society, if you will, than I am. One is Mountain Mariner, off-grid Alaska, who happens to live at the top of a mountain. He takes a helicopter when he needs to get off the mountain, and in the event that he had an emergency, he would be using an air ambulance service as well. The other channel that I watch is an Alaska homestead, and they're on an island, again, cut off from society, and there's no hospital near either one of these 2 parties. And so with that being said, when you have a real emergency and you're located remotely, every moment counts towards your being able to pull through that emergency, because it isn't like in the movies where you can just pour some whiskey on it and then next scene you're back up and running. I wonder what it would have been like to live back then, actually. Now I realize that this isn't the Old West, nor is it Hollywood, and I can't just pour some whiskey on a wound and have it magically go away. But that doesn't mean that I can't treat a wound here at the cabin. And I do that because I've been able to put together a trauma kit that will allow me to treat everything from a minor scrape and bruise all the way up to a incident that would require additional medical services. And so today I'm focusing on the items that I have in my trauma kit. I'm not talking about my basic first aid supplies. What I want to cover is where my kit started out and how my kit has evolved over time as you begin to look at the items that you're planning on having with you at your remote property or even there at your home if you live in a city. These are things that as time has progressed for me, I've begun to realize that my kit had a lot of inferior items in it, or that it wasn't up to the task of a real emergency. And I'll cover why as we go through these items. I want to start with is what I carry as my everyday carry items for first aid while I'm out and about away from the cabin. If I'm not with my first aid kit here at the cabin, what do I have on me so that I could treat a wound before I can seek additional medical treatment? If you followed my channel for any length of time, you probably have noticed that I can frequently be seen wearing a skirt. And a lot of people probably think that that really isn't practical when you're living out in remote Alaska. But my skirts are my form of cargo pants because I can then pack up pockets that run very deeply or have quick access to things that I store on my boot, such as my tourniquet, which is just held on by some molly strapping and allows me the opportunity to get access to it quickly so that I can apply it when need be. And if you don't have access to a tourniquet on you when you're out in the field or you're, working about in your cabin and you're having to go rummage for it, you're going to lose a lot of blood, especially when you're the only person, and you're now having a panic attack and your heart's racing, forcing that blood to go through your system quickly. By keeping the tourniquet on my person at all times, I know where it's at. I have the time strap pulled out of the way so I can get to the windlet and be able to apply pressure when need be. And I'm not having to worry about my fine motor skills interfering with my ability to apply the tourniquet. Now I keep it in a way that I can quickly get it over my boot if need be. So if I needed to apply it to my leg, I have that availability. But it's within reach. It's got quick and easy access for me. And I'm not having to scramble to find my tourniquet. And now you know what my skirts have to do with first aid. Don't say I didn't warn you. In addition to having my tourniquet on my boot, I also carry a knife in my other boot. And I use my knife much in the same way that I would a pair of medical shears. And these are great because they have a blunt nose on them, so they'll slide against the skin, and they allow you to easily cut away some fabric that might be hindering your ability to get to an injury or a wound. A lot of times what you're going to find with today's fabrics is that you can't just start a tear and then rip that fabric because of the way it's woven together or manufactured. Having a good quality pair of shears or a good sharp knife that allow you to cut away at the fabric is something that I highly recommend everybody have with them. The shears are fantastic because you're less likely to puncture yourself. When I started to put together my kit, I did it based off of the basic first aid and first responder training that I had taken through the Red Cross. And I recommend that everybody take that course. It is a great place to get a basic knowledge of first aid. In addition to taking that course, I also took CPR and AED training. But today what we're covering are the items that I put into my first aid and trauma kit after taking a Stop the Bleed course. A Stop the Bleed course really opened my eyes up to how to treat an injury or a wound in a trauma situation. We're not talking about a minor scrape or bruise here. We're talking about a deep laceration, a puncture that is causing severe bleeding, or we're talking an amputation of a limb and a life-threatening situation. And so today's video, we're covering the items in my first aid kit and how they evolved to cover these type of scenarios. Before you can get to medical care, you are going to need to treat these type wounds on the spot, and time is of the essence. When my kit first started, I had, as I mentioned, just basic items in that kit. And one of the very first things that I included in my kit was just a rolled gauze that I can use to wrap a wound should I need to. Say if I get a laceration on my arm, I can just wrap this around it several times, tie it off, and I've got some basic wound dressing. And this is a fantastic thing. I still keep it in my kit. And this is actually what I'm currently carrying in my pocket when I'm out and about away from the cabin. But I upgraded this to a compressed Z-fold bandage. If I had a deep laceration or a puncture wound in a junctional area such as the neck or armpit or groin, someplace like that where I could not necessarily get a tourniquet, I could then pack that wound with the Z-fold bandage and get that really deep down in there, because the difference between the Z-fold bandage and this is that the Z-fold bandage is going to have this blue line in it, and that blue line can be detected by an x-ray. And if I were to lose consciousness before arriving at the hospital and they were to x-ray me, they would be able to detect that there was some wound pack in there and remove that prior to suturing the wound closed. I still keep the rolled gauze in my first aid and trauma kit. I do recommend that you upgrade as well to the Z-fold bandages. One of the things I recommend everybody has available to them is various forms of gauze, sponge in various sizes, so that you can use that to dress a wound as well. If I had a laceration that didn't require the tourniquet but was still bleeding profusely, I could apply the bandages one right on top of the other and apply pressure until the bleeding stopped. I could layer these on as many as need be, and that's why I do recommend that you do have some type of rolled bandage with you as well, because once you get these applied, then you can use that rolled bandage to secure it in place until you can get to the medical treatment that you need to resolve the situation. Now, once you get the bleeding to stop, you could then apply a wound dressing such as this, which is just a 3x3 piece of gauze with an adhesive backing on it, so much like a Band-Aid but larger, so that you can keep debris and dirt off of that wound while it heals. And I have various forms of rolled gauze as well in case I need to change out wound dressing over time as it's healing. You want to make sure you have an ample supply of these things, because one is not going to cut it. You're going to need to change wound dressing often to keep it clean and dry. And so I recommend having an ample supply. I also recommend that everybody have some type of adhesive tape. Now, the adhesive tape that I recommend for medical grade tape is one that you can easily tear with just your fingers, and you don't need shears or scissors in order to do so. And I recommend that you get it in some various width, but I also recommend that you get some Coban, and Coban can also just be torn. Band stretches so you can wrap it around and get some tension on a wound, but then it has properties that allows it to stick to itself, and it's waterproof. It won't hold water out of the wound necessarily, but it's not going to fall off if it gets wet like a Band-Aid would. So I truly recommend getting some Coban in your first aid kit as well. As my knowledge of trauma care began to expand, my kit began to evolve. I replaced my typical ACE bandage that I had in my kit with an Israeli bandage. An Israeli bandage is essentially an ACE bandage on steroids. What this has that makes it different than the ACE bandage is it has some gauze already sewn into it, and it has a cleat that, when used properly and placed directly over the puncture or laceration, it will apply the pressure for you. Where this is going to apply pressure evenly around your limb, this is going to apply the pressure where the cleat is. And so that cleat is what really sets it apart from the ACE bandage. And these are great for head lacerations or cranial trauma. I recommend everybody have a few Israeli bandages in their first aid kit. You might find that you have a large surface wound that you're going to need to treat. What you might wind up needing to do is improvise, overcome, and adapt in that situation. And one of the things that I first brought into my first aid kit that I did just that with was a roll of saran wrap. A roll of saran wrap is perfect to use when you have a burn, because it won't stick to the burn, and when you go to peel it away, it won't take the skin with it. Whereas if I were to use a fibrous wound dressing, as that burn began to dry out and I began to remove this, or the hospital removed it, they would wind up taking skin with it, causing further damage. So I do keep a roll of saran wrap still today in my first aid and trauma kit, because I can treat not only a burn with it, but I can also use it in conjunction with an abdominal pad like this, or a large wound dressing. I can treat a large surface wound, such as if I were to get a scalding burn on my abdomen or my legs. This is going to allow me the coverage area that I'm going to need to address. If you want to upgrade, though, from the plastic wrap, what I recommend getting is a blast bandage. And the reason I say that this is an upgrade is because the blast bandage is a large bandage that is meant for going over a stump. If I were to have an explosion that would cause me to lose a hand or a limb, and the stump that's left, I could then wrap this around, and it also has a bandage strap in it, which once it's wrapped around, it could then just be wound tight with the bandage strap and held in place, and that would contain everything for me. But a blast bandage can also be used over a large area. I could apply that blast bandage over that area and then wrap it with the bandage that's in here, and it's going to do a fantastic job of making sure that I'm protected in those incidences. Now, this is not the entirety of my first aid kit. As I mentioned, I do have your typical minor incident treatments available to me as well. I also carry in my first aid kit some quick stop. I do have some C-locks here, and I want to just briefly touch on the C-lock. If you're not familiar with quick stop or C-locks, what they are is they're hemostatic agents which help the blood to clot. The quick stop is made from a clay, which then activates the body to start the clotting process. Gen 1 C-locks was originally made from shellfish, and the reason I don't use it is because I'm allergic to shellfish, and therefore it would cause an allergic reaction, or could potentially cause an allergic reaction. So that is one thing to keep in mind. If you're looking for a hemostatic agent to help with clotting, I recommend going with Quick Stop. Well, that wraps up the first aid and medical supply video. But I want to remind everybody that accidents can happen anywhere, including online. And recently, John in Alaska had an accident with his channel that caused him to lose all of his videos. He's doing his best to get them re-uploaded to YouTube, but if you would be so kind to pay him a visit, I'll leave the link down below, and I hope to see you there. If not, I hope to see you here again next week. Thanks for watching. If you've been sticking with me so far through this video and you haven't subscribed yet, please take a moment to do so. You obviously like what you see, and do me a favor, give it a thumbs up if you found it useful or entertaining, and also share it with your friends and family so that they can share in the adventures as well. If you would also take the time to leave a comment, I'll do my best to read that comment and respond to you. If I don't respond to you, I apologize. Sometimes the comments get held up by YouTube and I have to go looking for them. But I do appreciate you taking the time, and so I'd like to take the time back and share my appreciation with you. And if you're new to the channel and you haven't seen my other videos, be sure to check out this video that YouTube recommends. And these are the videos that I recommend.